The grand ballroom of the Windsor Crown Hotel sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. More than 200 guests, billionaire CEOs, politicians, judges, and some of America's most powerful investors gathered to celebrate the signing of a $1 billion partnership. Every table carried a gold nameplate. Every guest wore designer suits worth thousands of dollars. The massive entrance doors quietly opened. A tall black man wearing a simple navy suit walked inside. His shoes were polished, but clearly old. He carried no bodyguards, no expensive watch, only a small gift box wrapped in blue paper. Several guests glanced at him, then looked away. One woman whispered, "Who invited him?" Another smiled. "He looks like he took the wrong elevator." Before the man could reach the reception desk, a waiter rushing through the crowded ballroom accidentally slammed into him. A full glass of red wine exploded across his white shirt and jacket. The ballroom fell silent. For 1 second, then laughter erupted from every corner of the room. Someone actually started clapping. One businessman laughed. Now he finally matches the red carpet. Another guest pointed toward the exit. "Security, get him out before the investors arrive." The black father never raised his voice. He simply looked down at the wine soaking through the small gift box in his hands. His fingers tightened, not because of the ruined suit, but because the gift inside had been meant for his daughter. The security guards stepped closer. Just as they reached for his arm, every screen inside the ballroom suddenly turned black. One sentence slowly appeared. "Final ownership approval required." The room froze. The event host looked nervously toward the entrance, then whispered words that made every billionaire in the room lose their color. "We can't sign the $1 billion deal until Ms. Ava Carter arrives." The same daughter, whose father they had just humiliated in front of 200 guests. The laughter echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers long after the red wine stopped dripping from Elijah Carter's jacket. More than 200 distinguished guests filled the magnificent Windsor Crown Hotel ballroom. Billionaire CEOs, government officials, judges, investors, and media executives had gathered to witness the signing of a historic $1 billion partnership that would reshape the future of affordable housing across America. Yet at that moment, no one cared about the billion-dollar deal. Every eye was fixed on one quiet black father standing alone near the entrance. The expensive wine had stained his white shirt a deep crimson. It slowly trickled onto the polished marble floor while whispers spread from table to table. "He doesn't belong here. Look at that suit. I thought tonight was invitation only." A woman wearing a diamond necklace shook her head with a mocking smile. "Some people really don't know where they belong." Several guests laughed again. Elijah remained perfectly still. He didn't look angry. He didn't look embarrassed. Instead, he carefully lifted the small blue gift box that had absorbed most of the spilled wine. The ribbon was ruined. The wrapping paper had begun to tear. Very gently, he wiped the box with his sleeve before holding it close to his chest. That box mattered far more than the expensive suit. Inside was a handcrafted walnut fountain pen. He had carved it himself after work every evening for nearly 3 weeks. Every tiny detail had been shaped by hand. It wasn't worth much money, but it carried 20 years of love. It was meant for his daughter. The young waiter who had spilled the wine stood trembling. "I'm terribly sorry, sir." Before Elijah could answer, the event manager approached with 2 security guards walking close behind him. His smile disappeared the moment he looked at Elijah. "Sir, this is a private corporate event. I'm afraid you'll have to leave." Elijah spoke quietly. "I'm only here to see my daughter." The manager looked surprised for less than a second before a short laugh escaped his lips. "Your daughter?" Another businessman overheard the conversation. "The CEO's daughter?" The surrounding guests burst into laughter once more. Someone sarcastically added, "Maybe she's also the owner." More laughter followed. Elijah never responded. He simply reached into his pocket and removed an old photograph. The picture showed a little girl around 8 years old sitting proudly on a wooden workbench. She was missing her 2 front teeth. Sawdust covered her small blue overalls. She was laughing while holding a tiny birdhouse beside her father. Elijah smiled at the memory. 20 years earlier, that tiny workshop had been their entire world. His wife, Sarah, had died after a long battle with cancer when Ava was only 10 years old. From that day forward, Elijah became everything: father, mother, teacher, protector. He worked 16-hour days building custom furniture just to keep food on the table. Many nights he quietly skipped dinner so Ava would never realize money was running short. Whenever she asked why he wasn't eating, he always smiled. "I already ate at work." It was never true. But fathers often become experts at hiding hunger. One winter evening, the workshop heater stopped working. The temperature dropped below freezing. Elijah wrapped Ava in every blanket they owned before secretly spending the entire night sanding furniture with numb hands because the deadline couldn't wait. The customer paid him only half of what they had promised. He accepted it anyway. The next morning, Ava found his hands bleeding from the cold. She gently cleaned every cut with warm water, then looked into his eyes. "Dad, one day, I'm going to build something so big, you'll never have to work this hard again." Elijah laughed softly. "You don't have to make me rich. Just grow into a good person." She smiled. "I'll do both." Standing in the ballroom years later, holding the ruined gift box against his chest, Elijah remembered every word. He had no idea. His little girl had quietly kept that promise. And within the next few minutes, everyone in that ballroom would discover exactly who Ava Carter had become. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the whispers spreading through the ballroom. Grace Morgan, the event director, walked quickly toward Elijah. Beside her was the company's chief legal officer, Michael Reynolds, carrying a thick black folder. Unlike everyone else, neither of them was smiling. Grace stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was calm. "May I ask you one question?" Elijah nodded politely. "Of course." She looked directly into his eyes. "Are you Ava Carter's father?" Before Elijah could answer, Richard Langford, the billionaire CEO hosting the gala, stepped forward with obvious impatience. "Grace, enough of this. We have investors waiting. The signing ceremony starts in 5 minutes." Grace ignored him. Her eyes never left Elijah. He quietly answered, "Yes. I'm Ava's father." For a brief moment, the entire ballroom became silent. Then Richard laughed. "So now we're making family claims?" Several guests joined him. One woman whispered, "First he says he's here to see Ava. Now he's her father." Richard looked toward security. "Escort him outside. We're wasting everyone's time." The two guards moved closer. Just as one reached for Elijah's arm, every light inside the ballroom flickered. The giant LED screen behind the stage suddenly went black. The orchestra stopped playing. Guests exchanged confused looks. A second later, white letters slowly appeared across the enormous screen. "Final approval pending. Authorized owner required." The room fell silent. The lead technician hurried onto the stage, typing frantically on his tablet. "It isn't working." Richard frowned. "What do you mean it isn't working?" "The signing system is locked. It won't release the contracts." Richard's face tightened. "Override it." The technician swallowed nervously. "I can't. The authorization requires biometric confirmation from the majority owner." Confused whispers spread across the ballroom. "Majority owner? I thought Richard owned the project." Michael Reynolds slowly opened the black folder in his hands. His expression had completely changed. He looked at Richard before speaking carefully. "Legally, you own only 49%. Richard's confident smile disappeared. "What?" Michael turned another page. "The remaining 51% belongs to the project's founder." Richard snapped. "Then call her immediately." Michael took a slow breath. "I already did. She's on her way." Richard asked impatiently, "How long?" Michael looked toward Elijah. Then quietly replied, "She said, 'Please tell my father not to leave before I arrive.'" Every conversation inside the ballroom stopped. More than 200 pairs of eyes slowly turned toward the quiet black father whose jacket was still stained with red wine. For the first time that evening, no one was laughing anymore. The silence inside the ballroom felt heavier than the music that had filled it only moments earlier. More than 200 guests stood frozen. The same people who had laughed at Elijah Carter now stared at him as though they had never seen him before. Richard Langford was the first to break the silence. "This is impossible." He turned sharply toward Michael Reynolds. "There has to be some mistake." Michael calmly closed the black folder. "There isn't. The ownership records were updated 3 years ago." Richard's face turned pale. "I approved every document." Michael looked directly at him. "You approved the operational agreements. But the controlling shares were transferred through a private trust. And that trust belongs to Ms. Ava Carter." Whispers swept across the ballroom once again. "The young woman owns the company? She's the majority shareholder? I've never even seen her." Richard forced a nervous smile. "Fine. If she owns the shares, she'll sign. She works for this company." Michael slowly shook his head. "No. You work for hers." Several executives exchanged uneasy looks. Richard's confidence disappeared for the first time in years. Across the room, Elijah quietly picked up the small blue gift box that had fallen onto a nearby chair. The wine had completely soaked through the wrapping paper. He gently peeled away the damaged paper and looked at the handmade wooden fountain pen inside. A tiny smile appeared on his face. Sarah would have loved it. She had always believed handmade gifts carried more love than expensive ones. He softly whispered, "I hope she still likes walnut wood." Grace Morgan overheard him. "You made that yourself?" Elijah nodded. "I've made something for her every birthday since she was 6. Grace looked at the pen. Its craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every tiny detail had been carved by hand. "You could sell these for hundreds of dollars." Elijah smiled gently. "I never made them to sell. I made them so she'd always know where she came from." Grace lowered her eyes. For the first time that evening, she felt ashamed. Ashamed that she had almost allowed security to remove him. Suddenly the ballroom doors opened again. Everyone instinctively turned. A long black sedan had just arrived outside the hotel. Several security officers rushed toward the entrance. The photographers lifted their cameras. Richard quickly straightened his expensive tie. "Good. She's finally here." He forced another confident smile. "When Ava arrives, she'll clear up this misunderstanding." No one noticed that Michael Reynolds said nothing. He simply watched Elijah. The ballroom doors slowly opened. A young woman stepped inside wearing a simple navy business suit. No diamonds, no designer handbag, no entourage. She carried only a leather portfolio beneath one arm. The room became strangely quiet. Several investors looked confused. "That's Ava Carter? She looks too young. She doesn't even have bodyguards." Ava ignored every whisper. She walked calmly across the ballroom. Richard immediately stepped forward with both hands extended. "Ms. Carter. Welcome. We're honored to have you." She didn't shake his hand. She didn't even slow down. Instead, she walked straight past him. Richard remained standing with his hand hanging awkwardly in the air. Every camera followed her. Every guest watched in complete silence. Ava continued walking until she reached Elijah. For one emotional moment, neither of them spoke. She looked at the wine covering her father's jacket, then at the ruined gift box in his hands. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Without caring who was watching, she wrapped both arms around him and hugged him tightly. The ballroom remained completely silent. Elijah smiled warmly. "You've always told me not to cry over spilled things." Ava laughed through her tears. "I also told you not to wear white shirts." A few guests awkwardly looked down at the floor. Nobody laughed this time. Ava gently stepped back. She noticed the damaged wrapping paper. "You made me another pen?" Elijah nodded. "It isn't perfect. The wine ruined the box." She carefully accepted the gift with both hands as though it were priceless. It was perfect before anyone touched it. She slowly turned toward the stage. Her warm smile disappeared. The confident business leader replaced the loving daughter. She looked directly at Richard Langford. "I believe someone owes my father an apology." Richard forced another smile. "Ms. Carter." It was only a misunderstanding. Before he could continue, Ava calmly interrupted him. "No. A misunderstanding is forgetting someone's name. This," she glanced at the red stains covering Elijah's jacket, "was a choice." The room fell silent once again. Then Michael Reynolds quietly walked onto the stage carrying another sealed folder. He looked toward Ava. "There's one more matter requiring your approval." She nodded. "Go ahead." Michael opened the folder. "Ladies and gentlemen, before tonight's $1 billion agreement can be signed, there is an internal investigation that must be addressed." Richard frowned. "What investigation?" Michael slowly removed several documents. The investigation into who secretly attempted to remove Elijah Carter's name from the original founders' agreement 20 years ago. The color drained from Richard's face. Across the ballroom, the guests realized this evening was no longer about a billion-dollar deal. It was about a truth that someone had spent 2 decades trying to bury. The applause faded almost as quickly as it had begun. No one knew what to say. Just 10 minutes earlier, the same guests had laughed as red wine soaked Elijah Carter's shirt. Now, those very people stood in complete silence, watching the quiet black father with a mixture of guilt and disbelief. Richard Langford forced himself to smile. "This has gone far enough." He looked toward Ava. "I'm deeply sorry if your father felt disrespected. It was an unfortunate misunderstanding. We're all professionals here. I'm sure we can move forward." Ava didn't answer immediately. She slowly placed the handmade walnut fountain pen on the conference table beside the billion-dollar contract. To everyone in the ballroom, it looked like an ordinary wooden pen. But to Elijah, it represented every late night he had spent carving after work, every birthday, every Christmas, every promise he had made to his little girl after Sarah passed away. Ava gently ran her fingers across the polished wood. "I still have the first one." She smiled softly. "The tiny maple pen you made when I turned 6. Elijah laughed quietly. The clip kept falling off. "You glued it back together 3 times. The father and daughter smiled at each other. For a brief moment, the billion-dollar gala disappeared. It was simply a father and his daughter sharing a memory. Several guests lowered their eyes. Grace Morgan felt a lump in her throat. She suddenly remembered her own father, a mechanic who had worked overtime his entire life so she could attend college. She hadn't visited him in almost 8 months. Michael Reynolds cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, there is another matter requiring your immediate attention." He lifted a second folder from his briefcase. Unlike the first, this folder carried a bright red label. "Confidential." Richard's smile instantly faded. "What is that?" Michael didn't answer him. He handed the folder directly to Ava. She opened it slowly. Her expression changed with every page. By the 3rd document, her jaw tightened. By the 5th, she looked directly at Richard. "Is this complete?" Michael nodded. "It includes every internal audit, financial records, email correspondence, and security footage." Richard took one nervous step forward. "You had no authority to investigate me." Michael calmly replied, "I didn't. The board did." A wave of whispers swept across the ballroom. "The board? When? Why didn't anyone know?" Michael spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "The investigation began 9 months ago after anonymous evidence suggested someone had manipulated ownership records before tonight's signing ceremony." Richard laughed nervously. "Anonymous evidence proves nothing." Ava quietly closed the folder. "It wasn't anonymous." Richard stopped smiling. "What?" She looked directly into his eyes. "It came from me." The room froze. "I started this investigation 9 months ago. I wanted to know why every time my father visited this company, he was treated like someone who didn't matter." Elijah looked surprised. "You never told me." She smiled sadly. Because I wanted facts before I brought you into it. Richard suddenly raised his voice. This is ridiculous. I built this company. I created this project. I brought in every major investor sitting in this room. Before anyone could respond, a calm elderly voice echoed across the ballroom. No. You inherited it. Every guest turned. An elderly man with silver hair slowly entered through the side doors, supported by a polished wooden cane. Several older investors immediately stood up. Some gasped. Others whispered his name in disbelief. It can't be. Chairman William Harrison, the retired founder of Harrison Urban Development. The man everyone believed had permanently stepped away from public life. Richard's face turned completely white. Mr. Harrison. The elderly man ignored him. Instead, he walked directly toward Elijah. He smiled warmly. It's been too long, son. To the complete shock of everyone watching, he extended both hands and embraced Elijah like family. The ballroom fell silent once again. William stepped back and looked around the room. I've spent 20 years waiting for this evening. And tonight, the truth finally gets to speak. Richard's breathing became uneven, because he knew something no one else in the room knew. If William Harrison revealed what had happened 20 years earlier, everything Richard had built, his reputation, his fortune, and even the $1 billion deal, could disappear before the night was over. The ballroom became so quiet that even the soft hum of the air conditioning could be heard. William Harrison slowly turned to face the crowd. I know many of you have spent years believing Richard Langford built Harrison Urban Development. He paused. But tonight, you deserve to know who laid its first foundation. He looked at Elijah. 20 years ago, this young man came into my office carrying nothing but a notebook full of ideas. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for a job. He wanted to build affordable neighborhoods where working families could finally own a home. Several investors exchanged surprised glances. William continued. I had never met anyone with such honesty. So I invited him to join my company. Richard suddenly interrupted. That's ancient history. It has nothing to do with tonight. William slowly raised his eyes. It has everything to do with tonight. He nodded toward Michael Reynolds. Michael immediately displayed an old photograph on the giant screen. The image showed a much younger Elijah standing beside William at a construction site, both smiling while holding blueprints. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Then another image appeared. The original housing master plan. At the bottom of the first page, under the words Lead Community Designer, everyone could clearly read one name. Elijah Carter. Richard's hands began to tremble. This proves nothing. William shook his head. No. But this does. Michael opened a sealed envelope and carefully removed a faded handwritten agreement. It is the original partnership contract. It clearly states that if Elijah Carter's community housing vision was ever used in a national development project, his legal heirs would receive controlling ownership through the Harrison Family Trust. The room exploded with whispers. One investor stood up. Legal heirs? Michael nodded. That legal heir is Ava Carter. Every camera in the ballroom instantly turned toward her. Richard's face lost all color. He realized the billion-dollar agreement had never truly been his to control. For 20 years, he had been standing on a foundation built by the very man he had humiliated only minutes earlier. And the worst revelation of the night had not even begun. The room fell completely silent. Richard Langford looked around the ballroom, hoping someone would defend him. No one did. The same executives who had praised him only minutes earlier quietly stepped away. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. Several reporters lifted their cameras. For the first time in his career, Richard stood completely alone. Michael Reynolds walked to the center of the stage. Based on the original partnership agreement, the Harrison Family Trust has confirmed that Ms. Ava Carter is the legal majority owner of this $1 billion development. He paused before adding, effective immediately, all signing authority belongs to Ms. Carter. A wave of whispers spread across the ballroom. Richard shook his head. No. This can't be happening. I built this company. William Harrison calmly replied. You managed the company. You did not build its foundation. He slowly pointed toward Elijah. He did. Richard turned toward Elijah. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Only fear. Mr. Carter, I think we've had a misunderstanding. Elijah looked at him quietly. A misunderstanding? Richard forced a nervous smile. I'd like to apologize. We should start over. The guests remembered his words from earlier. Security, get him out before the investors arrive. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Elijah remained calm. I accepted the accident with the wine. What hurt wasn't the stain. He looked around the ballroom. It was how quickly people decided my worth by looking at my clothes. No one spoke. Several guests lowered their heads in embarrassment. The young waiter who had accidentally spilled the wine stepped forward with trembling hands. I'm so sorry, sir. I tried to apologize. But I was too afraid. Elijah smiled warmly. You made a mistake. That happens. You were not the one who chose to humiliate me. The waiter wiped away tears of relief. Ava watched her father with pride. Even after everything, he still chose kindness. William Harrison nodded. That is exactly why I trusted him 20 years ago. He turned toward the audience. When Elijah first showed me his plans, he said something I'll never forget. A strong neighborhood isn't built with concrete. It's built when ordinary families are treated with dignity. William smiled. I knew then that he was building more than houses. He was building hope. The applause began quietly, then grew louder. Soon every person in the ballroom was standing. Not because Elijah had become important, but because they had finally realized he had always been important. Ava stepped onto the stage. She opened the small blue gift box and carefully removed the handmade walnut fountain pen. Holding it high enough for everyone to see, she smiled. My father has given me a handmade pen every birthday since I was 6. She looked at Elijah. When my mother passed away, Dad worked every extra hour he could. There were years when he wore the same jacket because buying a new one meant I couldn't buy school books. I didn't know until I was in college that he often skipped dinner so I would never go hungry. The ballroom became emotional. Several guests quietly wiped away tears. Ava continued, People think this company changed my life. She gently shook her head. No. This man changed my life. He taught me that success means nothing if you lose your character. She walked to the signing table. The billion-dollar agreement lay open before her. Instead of reaching for the expensive gold pen prepared for the ceremony, she picked up her father's handmade wooden pen. She smiled. This is the only pen worthy of signing my name. The room erupted into applause. Camera flashes filled the ballroom as Ava signed the agreement. The $1 billion partnership was officially complete. But she wasn't finished. She looked toward Michael Reynolds. I have one final announcement. He handed her another document. As majority owner, I am appointing a new chairman of Harrison Urban Development. The guests leaned forward. Ava smiled. Mr. Elijah Carter. The applause became deafening. Elijah looked genuinely surprised. He slowly shook his head. I've never wanted power. Ava walked over and gently took his hand. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. William Harrison laughed softly. I couldn't have chosen better myself. Even Richard lowered his eyes. He knew the decision was final. Security approached him. Not to embarrass him, but to escort him from the stage while the board prepared formal proceedings into the fraud uncovered during the investigation. Richard stopped beside Elijah. I'm sorry. I spent years chasing respect. And I forgot how to give it. Elijah looked at him for a long moment, then quietly answered, I forgive you. But remember this. Titles earn attention. Character earns trust. Richard nodded silently before walking away. As the celebration continued, Elijah stepped onto the hotel balcony for a moment of quiet. The city lights stretched across the skyline. Ava joined him. She leaned her head gently on his shoulder. You never told me life would be this hard. Elijah smiled. If I had, you might have been afraid to dream. She laughed. And you never told me you skipped meals. I wanted you to remember my smile, not my sacrifices. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Ava looked at the stained jacket he was still wearing. We should buy you a new one. Elijah chuckled. Maybe tomorrow. She smiled. No. Tonight. She gently brushed the dried wine stain with her hand. You know, this jacket is probably worth more to me now than any designer suit. Why? Because every time I see it, I'll remember that people poured wine on my father. But they could never stain his dignity. Elijah wrapped an arm around his daughter. Inside the ballroom, hundreds of guests continued celebrating the billion-dollar deal. A father quietly realized that the greatest success of his life had never been a company, a contract, or a fortune. It was raising a daughter who remembered every sacrifice and chose integrity over pride. Sometimes the richest person in the room isn't the one who owns the biggest company. It's the one whose family never forgets the love that built it.